Do monsters lurk in the rainforests? What haunts the deserts of the world? And what the heck is a snipe? Well, all of these questions might be answered in today's episode. These are allegedly true horror stories that are sure to give you a good scare. Enjoy these tales, and remember, if you have your own scary experience, share it with us at darkstories.org. And like and share this video if you support what I do. Quick question before we start. What are you looking forward to most? A possible Nintendo Switch Pro, Xbox Series X, or PS5? Man, I just want an RTX 3080 Ti for my PC whenever that comes out. Now, let's begin. Creatures in the Brazilian rainforest. From SSS 12345. I'm 24 years old. I took a trip to the Amazon rainforest in Brazil 4 years ago. I was going with a couple of friends, G and F. We had managed to score a trip there, thanks to F's parents who were loaded. We were ecstatic about the trip. It would just be us 3 guys. We thought we could manage ourselves if we had the help of some guides. We'd be traveling from our small Alabama town to Brazil. The flight overall, I think, was about 22 hours. We left in the afternoon, and we ended up getting there at 3 or 4 in the afternoon the next day, and we couldn't help but sleep much of the way. When we woke up, we were already descending. We could see the Rio de Janeiro airport below us. So I took a couple of pictures. By then, I was wide awake. G and F were coming too as well. We were desperately praying that the descent would be fast so we could get on the ground. And once we had landed, we collected our bags and soon found our taxi waiting for us. The guy in the car spoke no English, so we showed him the map we had. He knew where we were going. The car ride itself took another hour, and our destination was some very remote village where our guide, Francisco, was waiting for us. Francisco was an interesting character, about 30 years old and had wavy brown hair with dark brown eyes. He seemed like the type that did not put up with any crap, and he wore the most serious expression on his face. The 3 of us shook his hand one at a time. Now Francisco spoke in broken English, but it wasn't so bad that we couldn't understand. But I'll make it clear here whenever he speaks. He gradually opened up to us and got used to us. He planned to take us deep into the rainforest, to some lagoons and the Amazon River itself. We were hoping to see some big snakes and other bizarre animals. We were in the village of Iguape, a neat little quiet place where all the people were warm and friendly. Francisco's family themselves welcomed us, giving us spacey rooms for the night. We had a delicious meal of beans and rice along with some very delicious chicken, followed by some sweets that I don't really remember too well. The next morning, G shook me awake along with F, telling us to get our lazy rears up. F and I quickly got dressed, and minutes later, Francisco came in and told us to go. The car ride to the lagoon was 20 minutes, since Iguape was roughly full of rainforest itself. This lagoon was small, and by the time we stepped out of the car, the insects and birds greeted us. The humidity was great, and the 3 of us guys were getting rowdy with excitement, but Francisco calmed us down for a moment. He warned us to pay close attention to him, stating, "We are spending 2 nights with a tribe called the Guarani. They are the friendly tribe, and I've already contacted them." I replied, "Well, thank God they're friendly. But aren't there isolated, dangerous tribes here?" Francisco answered me, "Whatever you do, stay close to the village if you decide to explore a bit. But you must stay close, and most importantly, when we're on the river, keep your head down low. Sometimes they may fire arrows at us, but don't worry, we're gonna be fine." G and F laughed. Maybe we'll have shrunken heads by the end of the trip." Francisco's scowl deepened. "There's nothing funny. My own friend went too far away from the village and was never seen again. I know it was no animal, because I took a small hunting party out there, and we found arrowheads and blood where he'd been going." I felt a chill. I saw that G's and F's faces had darkened, too. We exchanged glances. I realized this could be dangerous, but deep down, I was still excited and determined to show it. When we arrived at the Guarani's village, we were surprised at their looks. They had tattoos and nose rings, some wore masks. The leader, whose name I think was Gulan, or something along those lines, awkwardly shook hands with us, as he and Francisco conversed in their native language. We got to the boat, and pretty soon we were speeding down the Amazon. The scenery was amazing. We even saw a jaguar staring at us through some trees. We saw alligators swimming through the water. A couple of minutes later, Francisco pointed at the water, and we nearly dropped our cameras. A massive anaconda was gliding through the water. We were in shock. We had seen the top predators of the Amazon in under 20 minutes. This place really was as wild as you would imagine. This snake in particular must have been over 20 feet long, maybe 25, and it was easily 200 pounds. Slowly it sank under the water. Then everything went downhill. Francisco began saying, "It can't be possible. We've seen only the dangerous animals." We weren't really sure what he was talking about. It was the rainforest. There'd be plenty more animals to see, right? But Francisco seemed scared all of a sudden, terrified even. He began to try to turn the boat around, and F started fuming, as the three of us weren't ready to leave. But Francisco suddenly jumped at him, putting his hand over F's mouth. Francisco hissed, "Hush, boy. These are signals of the wild. There's something dangerous here." The way he said it made me believe him. G must have agreed with me. F calmed down but was breathing heavily. He seemed mad still. Seeing Francisco act like this, I started wanting to head back myself. I wanted to have fun, and now it was the opposite of that. As I was thinking about this, I realized something that I hadn't before. The rainforest around us went quiet. G and F had already picked up on it. They were looking around. Francisco, for some reason, was breathing heavily. Suddenly, right out of the rainforest, we heard the voice of the leader of the Guarani that we had just met. But that couldn't be possible. They had only had the one boat that we were borrowing, and we were definitely a good 5 miles away from the village now. The voice spoke in English.
"Francisco, come here where it is safe. It's dangerous in the water."
Our names were spoken right after his. It couldn't have been the same man because their leader did not speak English when we met him. But I knew it was his voice, gruff and raspy like the leader had. Plus he rolled his R's when he spoke. The voice seemed to boom around us, and Francisco desperately tried to turn the boat around. But it was stuck. We couldn't move from our place. I was nearly crying at this point. We were far from the village. We had no radios with us, and our phones had no signal out here. And worst of all, there could be tribes out here who could hurt or even kill us. "Francisco, what's happening?" F asked. Francisco barely whispered a reply.
"It's the Mapinguari."
I stammered. "Well, what is that?" Something clearly didn't want us here, and it may be dangerous. "Something like your Bigfoot," Francisco said, crouching lower in the boat. I knew about the Bigfoot legend. Who hasn't heard of it? but I'd never heard stories of them making human-like voices. Francisco whispered, explaining that the Mapinguari hated for people to be in their territory. That we were seen as outsiders, and it would kill us if it got a hold of us. Apparently, these Mapinguari could be up to 10 feet tall, and the natives here were known to pray to them. All of a sudden, there was a large splash in the water. All of us turned toward the sound. There, I saw the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. Some sort of ugly, massive thing was wading through the water. It really was similar to how you'd imagine the American Bigfoot to be. But instead of 2 eyes, it had only one large, menacing one. There were also 2 large fangs coming from its mouth that seemed to be about 4 inches long. Its arms were massive, like if they grabbed a hold of you, they could tear you in half with ease. This big, horrifying thing was coming right for us. G was crying, and Daph was yelling at Francisco, who was frantically trying to make the boat turn to hurry. The creature was swimming towards the boat, screaming in an unnatural way. Nothing of this world could make a sound like that. When it got within 10 feet of the boat, it sank under the water. I was certain I was going to die then. I cried and screamed myself. Then, with a stroke of luck, the boat roared to life, and we sped out of there. At the last second, we turned around and saw the creature screaming, emerging from below the water. Back at the village, Francisco barely talked. He contacted a taxi to get us out of there. Back at the Guarani village, everyone seemed scared and quiet. Francisco hid us in one of the rooms, and we stayed quiet. When the taxi arrived, Francisco practically shoved us in the car. We rode away, vowing never to come back. We stayed at Rio de Janeiro the rest of the trip, and by the time we made it back home, we were still shaken. We told our families that the trip was incredible. While that was true, it wasn't entirely a positive sort of incredible. That trip will haunt us for the rest of our lives. Whatever you do, if you plan on going to the rainforest in Brazil, be careful and know what may be out there. Snipe hunting, from Lillia. I was 13 or 14 years old. I'm from Utah. It's home to a lot of urban legends and strange people, if you know where to look. Life is relatively normal for me. People like me don't come across trouble unless they look for it, and that happens to be exactly what I did in this story. It was the summer of 2016, near a lake during girls' camp. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a religious activity where all the girls in your neighborhood hop in some cars and camp out in the middle of nowhere, with a handful of adults for a little more than a week. I'm not saying girls' camp isn't bad, but boys' camp is worse from what I've heard. One of the girls who had just gotten her driver's license picked up her keys, flaunting them around endlessly before suggesting we go on a drive. At first, I was a bit skeptical. Pranks are nowhere near uncommon during campouts, and the older girls are infamous for it. Even then, I already knew where this was leading. The snipe hunt. My sister had told me about this years before I ever even stepped foot at the camp. Every year, the new girls who were old enough would be asked if they wanted to hunt for snipes with all the other girls. Snipes are supposedly small, hairless, rodent-like creatures that only come out at night. Originally, all the younger girls were told to put toothpaste on their faces and other stupid things, because it supposedly attracted them. In recent years, it's become less about embarrassing the girls and more about scaring the crap out of them. But younger me, always loving to see people suffer, I decided to come with them, already knowing what to expect. After half an hour of sitting in the back of a minivan, listening to girls blabber about the latest gossip and other things, we stopped on a dirt road somewhere in the forest we were camping in. This was quite literally dense forest. Since we were such a big group, we decided being at a campsite could be too disruptive. One of the leaders of the church had some sort of license or permission to camp in the middle of nowhere in some national forest. It was pitch black. The headlights only illuminated 10 feet or so, showing us only dried up grass and gray tree trunks. The girls started talking again before, as expected, the ringleader of the group subtly slipped in the possibility of snipe hunting. Interest almost immediately seeped into the group, and in no time every single girl was lacing up her hiking boots outside the cars, the older ones not so subtly smirking as they conjured up a plan for the snipe hunt. Younger me sat with her arms crossed in the car with another girl, refusing to join in on the hunt. No one really cared about my hissy fit, and in the end I was just being a little brat. A couple of minutes later, the sounds of the girls' hoots and laughter faded out into silence, until crickets and critters returned, filling the quiet gap. Me and that other girl, whose name was Grace, weren't really friends, more just acquaintances that pretended to be friends. I watched the still grass lit up by the headlights. There wasn't even a slight breeze running through the dull green-colored strands. It was nearing midnight now. We were bored, and the light conversation between me and Grace died out. The minutes ticked by, and I was starting to regret my defiance towards going with the other girls. But I didn't really want to leave Grace alone. This was boring, and Grace was not a very interesting person. Almost as if it was cued, the clock ticked midnight, and the crickets chirping outside all stopped at once. The rustling of leaves in the trees above us also seemed to stop. At first, I hadn't even noticed, but the silence rapidly became deafening. I remember glancing towards Grace in the seats in front of me, then looking out the back of the car. The red shine from the taillights didn't even light up enough to see the ground behind the car. My heart began to pound. She whispered my name, shuffling to a seat in the middle of the car from the front. Nothing happened for a few minutes. The silence stretched out between us and outside. I had slumped in my seat. It made me uneasy to be exposed in a situation like this, and Grace crawled into the back of the car with me at some point. A click resounded from the left side of the car. Grace and I began to hold hands only a moment before. I faintly remember her slipping a package of M&Ms into my hand at this point. I'm not sure why she did it. I think she thought it would be comforting, but the crinkling sound as it dropped to the floor was only disturbing. Eventually, the clicking sound registered in my mind, and just like some sort of twisted real-life horror story, my eyes slid towards where it came from. I'm pretty sure my heart skipped a beat. I saw a tall, burly figure stepping into the edge of the headlights the moment my eyes scanned that area. Tears welled up in my eyes, and Grace flinched toward me, practically curling up into my side. What I believe was a man slowly walked in front of the car. My mind took its sweet time figuring out that he was wearing a mask of some sort. 2 long horns stretched out on both sides of his head. It kind of looked like an animal skull you'd see in a desert in a cartoon. There were faded red and orange streaks painted neatly on the forehead and cheeks. The most disturbing part were the eyes. I think it would have been less terrifying if they were just 2 black holes, but instead they were long, open, and wide. You could see the actual man's face inside each slit. He had startlingly blue eyes, pale skin, and wrinkles around the edges as if he were smiling. It seemed like hours before he finally stopped inspecting the car and began looking inside through the windows. I couldn't breathe at this point, and was barely aware of Grace pulling me into the crevice where your feet usually were in a car. When I lost sight of the windshield, I didn't see him again. Probably 20 minutes later, the laughter of the girls came back, and they found me and Grace huddled on the floor, tear streaks on our faces. He didn't do anything to us, seemingly didn't even say anything to us. Years later, I've realized he probably looked through the window right above us on the right side of the car and saw us on the floor. While we didn't see him, I'm guessing this caused him to leave soon after. But after we told the girls what happened, they believed us, and we got out of there immediately. But I hate to think about what would have happened if it was just me or Grace left alone entirely in that car. I'm not sure if he had a weapon, but judging by the fact he was wearing a mask in the middle of the woods at midnight, checking into random cars, I don't doubt that he did. I consider myself and Grace lucky, and I'm glad the girls came back soon after. Who knows, he may have come back, and maybe he wouldn't have been alone. Skinwalker from the Desert, from SamiLynn. I was 16 years old, living in Nevada. I'm active in the rodeo. This happened in late winter. My brother and a close friend, who for the sake of the story I'll call T, got permission from the local reservation to use their arena to practice roping. We got there early in the morning, so we'd have all the time we needed. My brother's horse and T's are both very even-tempered and don't spook very easily. My mare, on the other hand, will panic at the slightest of things. She can be a handful most of the time, to be quite honest. Since the moment we got there, all the horses seemed to be on edge. But we shrugged it off and figured once they got to know their surroundings, they'd be fine. After spending the better part of the day throwing ropes and chasing cattle, we decided to go for a trail ride to explore the area. By then, the horses seemed to have calmed down quite a lot. Now, there's a river that runs close to the arena, so we decided to go explore down there and check out some animal tracks we had seen earlier. Once we got about 30 yards from the water, we could smell what could only be described as a rotting, dead animal. Then something in the tree line caught the attention of the horses. After that, of course, mine flat out refused to go any further. Being tired from a long day and frustrated from the horses' lack of cooperation, we all decided to call it a day. By that time, it was too late to load our gear and horses and take them back, so we decided it was just best to leave them there for the night and stay at T's, as she lived closer than my brother and I. We got their stalls ready for the night, got them fed and watered, and headed over to one of T's family's friends, who offered to cook us dinner. After some good food, good laughs, and a few games of pool, the weird encounter by the river was out of our minds. When 9 p.m. rolled around, we all wanted to get some sleep, but I wanted to check on the horses one last time. When I mentioned this, T's family friend warned me it was a bad idea to go out there alone at night. Wanting to respect that, T offered to drive down with me. We piled into the truck and headed back to the arena. It was only half a mile down the road, but the roads were very icy, so we had to drive slower than what I would have liked. Before crossing the bridge that went over the river, this feeling of dread hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked out the window just to be met with these glowing yellow eyes. They're hard to describe. All I know was that there wasn't enough light hitting them to make them glow like that. I'm normally a very rational person, but something in my gut told me that this was wrong. That's when T turned to me and asked if I smelled that awful smell, which I hadn't even noticed until she brought it up. When I didn't respond, she looked at me, then followed my gaze to see the same yellow-eyed glare that I was fixated on. We were both in terror, not knowing what the thing was that was looking at us, because from where we sat, it had to have been at least 8 feet tall. There are no animals in these parts that are that big. I finally came to my senses and hit the gas. Our truck started sliding, but we caught traction and made our way back to the arena. When we pulled up and the headlight hit the horses, the very first thing I noticed was that my mare hadn't even touched her food, and for her, that is out of the ordinary. She's a bit of a glutton and normally eats more than her fair share. The other two hadn't eaten either, which again we found odd. But being scared and cold, we got back in the truck and drove back without incident. We got back to T's at about 11, and as soon as our heads hit the pillows, we were out like light bulbs. I woke up suddenly to my brother grabbing my arm and shaking me. I asked what was wrong. He put his finger over his mouth and pointed to the window. I heard a tapping on the glass and occasional scratching. I looked at the clock and it was 3 a.m. T and I hadn't told him about our encounter at the bridge, but it was late, and I wasn't going to tell him now, just to scare him even more. Trying to be rational, I told him to just ignore it and try to get some sleep. But I was convinced it was the thing from the reservation, and it had followed us back. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and as soon as the sun was up, I woke up T and my brother so we could go get our horses and get home. I didn't want my poor girl out there with that thing any longer. I told T about the tapping and scratching, so after coffee we went to look by her window for tracks. Sure enough, there was what appeared to be deer hooves, but they didn't look like normal deer. The way the pattern of hooves were, it was like the deer was injured, but that still doesn't quite describe it. It only seemed like one pair and not two pairs. After that, I was even more worried about the horses. They were all fine, but the food and water were still untouched. We loaded up, and we were out of there as fast as we could. As we drove over the bridge one last time, I looked into the tree line just to see a massive buck staring back at me. This thing was huge, and it looked rotten and dead. I swear to God, I saw skin falling right off of its bones. His legs were bent in all weird directions. That wasn't even the worst part, though. The worst was its face, because they contained the same yellow eyes that we'd seen the night before. I swear this thing smiled at me or something as we drove away, revealing a sickening smile with yellow pointed teeth. I looked away for a moment, only to glance back again, and by then, the creature was gone. I guess it wanted to get one last scare from us. I still have so many questions from that night, but the only thing I know for sure is that I'm never going back there again. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode, but don't you worry because more scary stories are on the way soon. Remember, if you have a scary experience of your own and you'd like me to narrate it, share it with us at darkstories.org. Check the links below if you want to support the show. Like and share this video too. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who have donated or continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.